I remember being told once that, write grade 1 and 2. If you write grade 1 and 2 music, that's going to have the highest sales by far. I have not found that to be the case. It's more in that middle area, 3 and 4. And in my case, 5 does pretty well too. So.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer, and this is episode number 56. My guest for this episode is Frank Ticheli. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I appreciate your time, and I hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know 1 or 2 people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Now, on to the episode. Hi, Frank.
Hi there. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining me tonight. I appreciate you taking some time out for this.
My pleasure, Mark.
So, Frank, I know most of my listeners are going to know who you are, but can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm Frank Ticheli. I'm a composer, a professor of composition here in Los Angeles at University of Southern California. And I've been composing for most of my life.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you. I don't think our paths have crossed before now, so it's really nice to talk to you.
Same here.
So, Frank, could you tell the listeners a little bit about your origin story, how you got started in music?
Sure. Well, I grew up, the early part of my childhood was spent in the New Orleans area, a small town outside of New Orleans. So my earliest musical memories were of that old traditional New Orleans jazz. And my father used to take me into the French Quarter to hear that music. And so those were the early influences. And the earliest musicians I remember hearing were people like Pete Fountain on clarinet, Al Hurt on trumpet, Louis Armstrong, of course. So I early on wanted to play clarinet, and because of that, and we went to a pawn shop right in the heart of the French Quarter, right on Bourbon Street, and there was a trumpet in the window and a clarinet in the window. The trumpet was a little bit beat up, and the clarinet looked pretty good. The clarinet cost $80, but the trumpet cost $45. And my dad said, "Son, sorry, you're going to play the trumpet." And that was the end of that. So that $45 decision determined the rest of my career. So I played trumpet. And then from there, we moved to Dallas, Richardson, actually, suburb of Dallas. And I continued my studies there, went to one of those Texas powerhouse bands. I was a member of one of those. And that sort of lit the fire in my young adolescent belly. I was, 14 years old or so, and had no idea that kids my age could sound that good or play that well. So that's when I really started getting excited about the possibility of music as something I'd want to spend a lot of my time doing.
Yeah, and so those early experiences in New Orleans, listening to all those jazz musicians, do you find that has come through in your professional career as a composer?
Yes, sometimes in obvious ways, like my work, Blue Shades, and I've got a concerto for jazz band and orchestra called Playing with Fire, where it's really obvious. But even in my works where it's not so obvious on the surface, it's there beneath the surface, not very far beneath the surface. It's in the pulse. It's in the choice of sonorities. It's in the rhythm. It's in the energy. It's just there. That's a sort of a certain. I think it's even broader. It's a kind of an American sound that many American composers have, whether it's through traditional jazz or more modern jazz or other folk musics in America. There's a certain kind of sound that's wholly American that is somewhat distinguishable. And I'm a little bit going into generalizations here, but in general, there tends to be a little bit faster pulse in an American sound and a little bit faster energy. Even if the music's not moving so quickly, the pulse is fast. And I think that's sort of in my music.
And so now you said that you moved to Richardson, Texas. Is that correct?
That's correct, when I was a young teenager.
And so we know about the Texas band tradition. And so what was that like? What sort of influences did that have on your young career?
Well, as I said, it was a very modest program in Louisiana that I was in. And then, so when we moved there, it was quite a shock for me. It was not just that kids could play that well. I was hearing kids my age play so well, but it was the music we were playing. My high school band director was Bobby Floyd. He's now head of TMEA, Texas Music Educators Association. But at the time, he was my high school band director. And I just remember from that early age, just suddenly I'm being exposed to this incredible music, the Hindemith Symphony, Doll Sinfonietta, and then fun things like Rocky Point Holiday of Ron Nelson. That was just such an inspiration for me when I was very young. And so that's sort of what came out of those early years, those first few years in the Dallas area, was just the surprise at the quality of playing and also at the quality of the music.
So you mentioned the high school at Texas. You had some terrific teachers there. What lessons did you take from them that you carried on through college and then into your professional career?
Well, that particular program was really special. In Texas at that time, it was the atmosphere was very competitive and and when I say competitive, I mean bands had contests, and that kind of atmosphere can be antithetical to good music making and to artistry. But I was lucky. I was at a program where the teacher was able to bring us to a level that we would do well in all of those contests so he could keep his job, but he would go beyond that and not compromise artistic matters and really high level music making. And when I say that, I mean the passion in the music, the beauty in the music. Music is an art form, not just the technical aspects of the music. So I felt very lucky. And so that's something I took away from it, is that you can reach a high technical level and not necessarily be a good musician. And he taught us that. There are many other takeaways, and there are many other benefits from that time. There was an assistant conductor there. His name was Jerry Brumbaugh. He came up to me one day. I believe I was a sophomore. No, I was older than that. Maybe even a senior. He came up and said, Frank, you're a pretty good trumpet player. Yeah, okay, pretty good. But you have the ears of a composer. You should consider composition as a possibility in your life. Because at that time, I thought I was just going to be a trumpet player. And he put that on my radar at a very, very early age. I was also starting to get interested in composing. And so I really owe a debt of gratitude to him for having the wisdom and the foresight to come to me and just make that comment. It's a real lesson for music educators out there. It's easier to spot talent that is manifested on an instrument, performance talent. It's not as easy to discern talent like that, the kind of talent with good ears, really good, just a gift with the ears, be able to hear music. That's not as easy to see. You have to really spend some time looking out for that kind of talent. And so he did. And so I'm grateful to him for that.
So Frank, I know you as a composer of many different genres, but you're on this podcast for a band podcast, but you're perhaps best known for some of your band music. How did you sort of get into writing for band?
Well, that's really interesting because I didn't intend on doing what I ended up doing. I just sort of fell into it happily, but fell into it kind of by mistake. When I went to Michigan grad school, I was writing everything but band and wind ensemble music. I was writing a lot of chamber music and vocal music, electronic music, other thing, and was actually kind of consciously staying away from wind band music because that's where I came from. I came out of that sort of, that tradition, and I wanted to broaden my abilities and my scope. So I purposely stayed away from it because I already knew that sort of world. And then it was right near the end of my doctoral studies. I got a commission to write a trombone concerto for trombone and band. I did it. And then I sent it to this publisher, Bob Margolis, at the suggestion of my band director there, H. Robert Reynolds, who was director of bands there. And then Bob Margolis said, why don't you try writing some pieces for young musicians? I said, what? Young musicians? It was completely off my radar. I had no idea how to do it or why I should do it. And he sort of suggested it. And so I wrote a couple of little pieces. I wrote a piece called Fortress and another called Portrait of a Clown. And just did it for fun. I thought, okay, done. Sent it off to him. And I thought, okay, now I've done my young band pieces. I'm done now. Now I'll go back to orchestra music and other things. And And he called me back and said, "This is really good." And he got it recorded, and it went out there, and people played it and all over the place. And I thought, well, that's kind of fun. Then I started getting invited to go out and conduct these pieces. And that was fun. And I wasn't a very good conductor back in those days either. But I started doing it, and I had fun with that. And so that it sort of became a situation where it was a system of rewards. I enjoyed that, and so I wrote some more music for young kids. I enjoyed that, so I wrote some more. I wrote some more music for older folks as well. I wrote a piece called "Postcard." Enjoyed that, and so it just sort of kept reinforcing itself, this idea. And then, of course, what really happened was, after I'd written a small body of music, the commission offers that were coming in my way tended to be for wind ensemble and concert band. And so those were my commissions, so I wrote more. And I still had commissions for other things, lots of orchestra music, and became composer in residence for an orchestra. So I was doing that too, but there were far more commissions coming in for wind band than there were for any other medium. And so here you go, skip ahead 40 years later, and I've got something like 55 works now for concert band and wind ensemble. That's just the way it happened. And I suppose if you added up the number of minutes, there's probably almost as much orchestral music as there is band music, because they tend to be longer pieces, more symphonies. I've got big pieces for orchestra, but the number of pieces for band far exceeds any other medium.
Yeah, I love that story because it's similar to I was doing the same thing. I was writing chamber music, but the band world is so much fun. I love that thought of it being fun, because it should be fun, right? Music, that's why we got into music to begin with.
It is. And another thing I really love about it is, when you write a piece for someone, for a wind ensemble or a band, you go there and they have absorbed the piece, because before I get there, they've spent a lot of time rehearsing that piece, and they have internalized the piece. When I show up for a professional orchestra concert, I show up at the same time that they're starting rehearsals. They have 2-3 quick rehearsals and they're done. And that's just how it is in the professional world, of course. And then they're on to the next concert. So while they play it really well, they don't internalize it. So I do enjoy the fact that in the wind band world, musicians have time to internalize my music. It becomes a little bit more part of them than maybe the music for other media does.
Sure. Do you feel that wind band music is stigmatized in the broader concert music community?
Oh, of course it is. I think less so now, but it's certainly still there. Absolutely. I still see it everywhere I go. And
so how do you address it? Do you even bother?
Yeah, it actually doesn't bother me that much. Everybody's got their prejudices, and maybe it used to bother me more in the past, but I see now that there's really it's just people's perceptions, whether they're misguided or not. And it's something I don't spend a lot of time addressing anymore. For me, the more important thing is write the music. Just write the music you believe in. Write the music you want to write, and that's what I try to do. And don't worry about all those other things. That sort of made my life a lot happier. But I see it all the time. I just saw it recently. I was out of town and I saw that same thing still happening. That same sort of stigma in terms of writing for and just the whole medium itself, the wind band medium. There's still people out there who have that. Thankfully, there are far fewer nowadays, because more important, people realize that the medium is not what it was 30 years ago and 40 years ago. It's completely changed now. It's a pretty exciting medium now, and creative, broad in its stylistic range. It's on fire right now in that it's living and breathing and thriving. More new music probably being written for that medium than any other medium, and so that's something to celebrate.
Absolutely. So now, Frank, I know that you've been published. You mentioned Bob Margolis earlier, and so you've been with Manhattan Beach for most of your career as far as the band music?
That's correct.
Yeah. Do you have any other publishers or just Manhattan Beach?
Oh, yes. Henshaw Music has my choral music, and that's now been bought out by Fred Bach Music, which is still called Henshaw. So all my choral music's there on the Henshaw publishing label. And then I have a couple of other smaller publishers as well for some chamber music. I used to be also with European American, but there's a gentleman there I really loved. His name was Ronald Freed. When he passed away, I actually took back my orchestral music that was with that publisher and decided I'd keep it myself. I just do it. I'm able to handle the orchestral music myself, at least for now.
What do you think the advantages and the disadvantages of being published commercially versus self-published?
Well, of course, when I first started, they did everything for you. They engraved your music. I would send a pencil score. They engraved it. They also did the parts. Of course, I had to proofread everything, but they engraved it. And then they, of course, market it, and they printed it, and they distribute it out to the distributors and all of that. And nowadays there's less. I do all my own engraving. I send my publisher all the music, parts, score and parts, publisher ready. Because now that I do it on, I use Sibelius, I use that software. By the time I'm done, it's ready to go. And I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I prefer to just send everything to my publisher ready to go. So that takes away that benefit. And then nowadays, more and more, young composers are doing that, and they're also even doing the distributing. They're bypassing publishers and dealers and distributing themselves, or in the case of some, they're bypassing one of those two, bypassing the publisher and going right to certain kinds of distributors. So it's completely changed now. I suppose, especially for the younger guys, I could see a huge, and gals, I see a huge benefit to that, because you still get to own your music. It's your music. You wrote it. You own it. And I get that. And I also think they probably make more money per sales item than I make, certainly, for that reason. But boy, you trade off something. You have to be a business person, and I don't just mean an entrepreneur. You don't have to just have an entrepreneurial spirit. You have to put in time as well as a business person. I don't have to do that. I send it off, and I don't have to worry anymore. And I can get back to doing what my teaching and my composing and being with my family. And I don't have to worry about that business side of things. And so I trade off a couple of things. I trade off the copyright ownership, and I trade off probably some of the money that could be made, but I don't worry about that. I'm happy with the way things are.
I think that's similar to your comment about writing the music you want to write. I've spoken to a lot of different composers who are on both sides of this fence, and that's the one thing they all say is just do what makes you happy, do what you can. It's
the most important thing, because it's such hard work. If you're doing this work for a reason other than for your own joy and fulfillment, then you're definitely doing it for the wrong reason. And if you do that over a period of years and decades, you're going to get either burned out or have physical problems or health. It's just going to get you in some way. So I'm a big advocate on making the joy the absolute first priority in regards to why we do what we do.
Yeah. I spoke with Tyler S. Grant. Do you know Tyler?
No, I don't.
Tyler's a young composer. He's in his 20s. He's finishing up his music ed degree at the University of Alabama, and he's got a great deal of music for young band published through FJH.
Uh-huh.
And but what he's doing is he's self-publishing his grade 4 and 5 music and commercially publishing his grade 1 and 2 and 3 music, or grade 1 and 2 music, which I think is a really interesting kind of model.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I guess, he feels like commercially you can reach the middle school market better through the publisher than you can yourself. It's just one way of looking at it. I thought that was really clever.
Yeah, different music sells at different rates. The most difficult music is going to sell in smaller volumes, because there are just fewer ensembles out there that can handle it. So,
Frank, if I'm a high school band director or a college band director who's looking to commission you and to get a work from Frank Ticheli, what would that look like? What would my process be from the beginning to sort of getting the work?
Well, I don't like to be told too much about what to do, other than what's the event. Is this an anniversary? Is it a celebration? Is it in memory of someone? But other than that, I don't like to be told what kind of music to write. I also do like to have it as well. And I need time. I need to be, I think this is the case for most composers. You need to be ahead of the clock a bit, and, be at least 2, 3, 4, even 5 years out when you're planning a composers. Most composers worth their salt are going to be backed up for at least a couple of years. So I think a minimum of 2 or 3 years out before you want to actually premiere the piece. I think it's important also to budget in, besides once you've agreed an amount, you have to also budget money for to fly the composer in. And so that's something that some people forget about. They say, okay, we've got X amount of money for this commission. Okay, then it goes to the composer and they're done. And now it's time for the premiere, and now we've got to fly the composer out. We don't have any more money. You have to budget that in as well. And so little things like that to consider are important to me. So just for me, that's basically it. I'm pretty straightforward. I don't have a standard contract. I do have a sort of a standard fee that I don't like to talk about publicly. I have a fairly standard commission fee. And then beyond that, it's pretty simple and straightforward. I do enjoy either smaller consortia or individual commission. There's a huge advantage to large consortium commissions in that everybody gets to pool their money and they don't have to spend too much, and they all get to sort of quote unquote co-premiere the piece, and the composer's guaranteed a lot of performance. That's good, but you're missing some of the intimacy that happens when you do a smaller consortium or an individual commission.
So do you have any advice to high school or college band directors who are looking to commission, just in general, beyond just you specifically? I just that you, first of all, be sure you commission someone you genuinely believe in. I guess that's pretty obvious, but want to waste your efforts on composers who may have a big name, and you commission them because they have a big name, but you're not crazy about their music, kind of thing, over a composer who may not have as big a cachet, but you kind of enjoy the composer. So that's something I think that's really important to think about. Make sure you choose a composer that you believe in. Right, because that composer is going to write their music, not the music you want them to write. That's what I often say. I can only write the music I write. I can only write my music. I can't be someone else.
That's true. And then the other thing is make sure that you don't forget that there's a risk involved here. Just because you admire that composer doesn't mean that composer is going to write something that you're going to fall in love with right away or ever. You're taking a risk. It may actually end up failing. There's a risk involved with a commission. And so that speaks to why we commission music. And we commission music because we're doing it as a service to our profession and to our art. And there's a risk, that innate risks that come inherent with that.
Yeah, I like that. I like that thought. It's important to think that way. Okay, so Frank, what's your process for writing a new piece of music? Do you have one thing that happens, or is it just changing?
Well, there's no one way that I write a piece. There is no single process. I just sit down and I compose, and I don't know where I am at first with a piece, and I just start out in chaos and in a complete sea of confusion. And fog lifting, something starts to clarify itself. I just start to see more clearly, but it's a slow process. And I'm all over a piece when I first start. I'm never at the beginning. I don't have a form in mind. I don't before I've got for me, the music dictates the form. The content will gradually yield a form rather than vice versa. So I don't have a form in mind. I don't have an idea how the piece should start necessarily. Sometimes I don't. I just start writing, and then I see what takes hold. Maybe one idea takes hold, and then a week later I realize, nope, this isn't the right idea. But that other idea that I thought was no good, now I'm looking at that again. So I hang on in the beginning because I'm never sure, because I don't know where I am at first. I'm never sure what's working and what's not working. So it's very much about staying open and about staying curious and open-minded, and just of where I'm trying to head. And so it's a very slow, mysterious process that I don't entirely understand. And that's why it's so difficult to teach composition, I think, because it is really a mysterious process. And we just do it. We learn harmony and counterpoint and orchestration and all those things that you learn in school. But that's nothing compared to there. You've learned all that. Now here's a blank piece of paper. Go write a piece that no one else has thought of. Go. That's the part that you can't really teach. And that's the part that's the mystery. But that's also the part that draws me to composition. It's just that, the mystery and the fact that I'm never going to completely understand it. It's that keeps drawing me back to composition. And that's the exciting part to me.
Yeah, that's well put. It's well put. Certainly, there's all those skills that you mentioned, harmony and counterpoint and orchestration. They're useful skills, but often those aren't really part of the creative process. They're part of the completion of the work.
Yeah.
To me, they're corollary, but the ideas don't come from those things. Those are just skills.
That's right. And also, those skills, I find you need to learn those skills, and so that you're not thinking about them. If you're having to think about the technique too much, it gets in the way of the creative process.
Yeah,
here's a perfect comparison. It's those conductors who aren't thinking about conducting technique, but they're making music now because they've already learned the technique. And an even more obvious analogy would be just the sentence you just said to me. How did you say that sentence? You didn't have to think about how to manipulate the air from your lungs to move your tongue and your mouth and your lips and all of that. You don't think about that stuff, but it's there. You have to, and it's the same with composition. You learn all of that stuff so that you can think about it and have it there in the subconscious mind, but not in the forefront all the time.
Right. I hear that often with athletes too. If they think too much, they're not playing, they're not performing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing.
All right. So we just talked a lot about composition right there, but I generally ask composers if they have any advice for young composers, or maybe perhaps a band director who might be interested in starting to write music for their own band.
Well, for young composers, I think it's really important that a couple of things. Don't forget in the first place. We start out, we do this because it's fun. And it brings us great joy, and the beauty is incredible. We forget that sometimes. When we get to school and we start having pressure on us, and as you're developing your craft, and you see other students your age maybe doing better, you think they're better than you are, whether they are or not, you think they are, and it's very easy to fall into that trap of feeling like, well, I'm not a composer. I'm not even the best composer here, wherever you are. And that is completely the wrong reason. I suffered from that same misconception when I was a student. And it was a fellow student who said to me, Frank, you compose. You don't compose to be the best. You compose because you're who you are. You're Frank. I'm Mark. The guy you think's better than you is John. And what's far more important is that each one of us brings to the table in our music and tries to express ourselves. We try to express who we are and what we value, and dig deep down into who we are and bring that out. Share that with your fellow human beings through your music. And if you do that, you can't help but contribute something worthwhile to the profession. Just be genuine to who you are. That was a huge lesson. I say that all the time to young composers. Don't try to be the best. Spend much more of your energy finding out who you are. Do your best at bringing out who you are. That's what you do the best at. That's a really important thing. I think it's easy to forget that.
Yeah, I always think about that scene in Amadeus where the Salieri character throws the crucifix into the fire. You know the one I'm talking about, how that captures that feeling of like
bitterness.
Yeah, of course, because I think at some point we all hear something and we think, I should have done that, or I could have done that. And, we can get in our heads really easily. Yes,
or I can't do that. I'll never be able to do that, that kind of thing. You can't do that because it's not your music. That's the thing. And so that's something that's okay. We think, oh, I can't do that. That's bad. No, I can't do that. That's good because I'm doing my music. And so that's what he did. And now I'm writing my music. And Salieri like bitterness, which, by the way, is absolutely not true. That Salieri.
Right, of course. Right. Yeah, it's historically inaccurate. But
that bitterness comes from that sort of comparative way of thinking, which I think is, again, a huge fallacy.
Such a wonderful cinematic moment, though.
Yes, that's great on screen, isn't it?
It is. I sometimes I have the sensation of going back and listening to my music and not remembering how it happened and being like, wow, I did that?
I know, the same here. Not some. I don't know how I wrote any of it. I look back and I don't remember. You kind of have to forget, don't you? Because you have to get on to I kind of have to forget how I did that so I can go on to the next piece and start over in a way. I'm a beginner again. Every time I start a new piece, and I have to find that universe is this piece going to occupy. And in a way, I feel like a beginner every time I start a new piece.
All right, Frank, this has been great so far. I'm going to go into the questions I ask all of my guests. Okay. And so these are common questions for everyone who appears on the show. And so one we already talked a little bit about in the beginning of the episode. We talked about competition a little bit, but this is somewhat of a controversial issue, as we know. Where do you personally draw the line at unhealthy versus healthy competition?
Well, again, when the competition becomes something that's more outside of yourself, it runs a risk of being very unhealthy. It's why I'm not a huge believer in these sort of band contests that are out there, that are all over the place. It's far more important to be more in competition with yourself. And again, that's why I admire my teacher, Bob Floyd. He had us compete with ourselves more and just to be the best we could be. And then we go out and do those things, but we'd already sort of done our job by being the best we could be. So that's just something that's really important to me. When it goes outside the self, it runs the risk of being unhealthy.
Right. So you're saying that success or winning is more a corollary to everything else.
Well, it's just, success is something that is internal. You succeed when you did the best you could have at any given time to express what it is you're trying to express, whether it's composing or performing. That's already success. So when you're younger, the bar is down lower. And if you're able to meet that bar, whereas if you get much older, the bar's higher. Well, now you've exceeded that bar when you were younger, but you're just not a success yet because you haven't met your own personal bar. It's a personal thing.
So, Frank, another issue with band directors and with musicians in general is work-life balance. How have you found your own balance in your own work in life?
Well, sometimes I don't do a good job of it, but when it does work, I just try to balance my, as I just mentioned to you before, my family and or maybe I didn't mention that before, my family, my teaching, and my composing, and my guest conducting. There's this depth of those sort of areas of my life sort of engage in. And sometimes the dance works, and sometimes the dance is such that these four partners sort of step on each other's toes. You can have a dance among those things, but without stepping on each other's toes. So for me, when it really works is when all these four aspects of my life are in harmony with one another, and the dance among them works. And it's not easy. And the spring, there's some compromise and there's give and take. So in the spring, the dance is more dominated by guest appearances, guest conducting, because I'm very busy guest conducting. And then in the summer, the family life and composing dominate more in my life. And the guest conducting gives way to that. And the teaching, of course, as well. So it varies throughout the calendar year. And so it's a constant sort of stream of give and take major areas of my life.
So what are the challenges that are facing music education or the band world as we move forward into the 21st century?
Well, of course, one of the big challenges right now is in the public schools, but that's, we've been talking about that for 40 years to the point that I almost get tired of talking about it.
Seems like it, yeah.
Challenge, and it goes on, and it's getting worse in some still hanging. It's still doing well in other pockets of the country. It's a never-ending thing. And yes, it gets old to talk about it. We have to keep talking about it because it's not old for the next generation coming up. It's new to them, and they need to hear it as well. The next generation of music needs to know, needs to find their solutions to these and their contribution to these challenges. Because it's just never ending. And it ebbs and flows with the political climate. and it ebbs and flows with the economic situation in the country. All of these factors play in, and we just and I see it as something that has to be addressed and tackled really year in and year out with every new generation. It has to be so that we don't get too complacent and let things fall through the cracks, and then before you know it, there's no music in the public schools.
Right.
Or very little. Yeah. Something that has to constantly be addressed and readdressed.
Yeah, no question. I'm hoping to have some folks who have some music advocacy background to come and talk on the podcast pretty soon. So it's certainly something.
That's really important, I think.
Never stop talking about. Absolutely. One of the questions I ask is, what advice would you give to your younger self? And so maybe your high school graduation, looking forward, what would you like to tell yourself?
There's a lot of things. One of the things I already said to you, which is don't forget why you got into music in the first place. Just the sheer fun and joy of it. We forget that when the deadline's pressing, or this or that kind of, or you're stressing out over too much going on in your life. We forget those things. And for the music educator, we forget that when things aren't going well in the rehearsal, when the kids are acting up, because kids are kids, they're going to act up, and we forget these things. You have to constantly remind yourself that the hard work of making music is fun. And we sometimes forget that. We sometimes let the hard work overpower our joy. And I just remind myself, no, the hard work is fun. So that's one thing. Another thing is to never underestimate the power of music to show us beauty and healing beauty in ways that transcend words, that in ways that only music can. It occupies that place that words can't touch. Music does. And I think it would remind my younger self of that, just the sheer power of music to heal and to take us to teach us beauty in ways that we can't describe with words. I think that's really important. I could have known that when I was younger. You haven't lived long enough. You don't know those things yet, but in time, you're taught it over and over again how music can heal. I mean, my piece in American Elegy, I wrote that for the Columbine High School. It would be completely wrong so that many other events like that. But I'm honored that people keep using my elegy as a way to honor survivors in the next tragedy and the next. I'm going to Stoneman Douglas High School on June 2nd to conduct, it looks like now, Sanctuary. And I'm sad that the situation out there in our country makes it necessary that we even have to have a concert like this, but and feel so privileged that I get to go and play my small little part in helping that community to find solace and peace, and all of us, and myself. And that's what music can do. And that's not an obligation we have as musicians. We have no obligation to do anything as a composer. Nobody tells you what you have to do, but boy, is it a privilege and an opportunity to be able to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's a great thing in June. I'm looking forward to seeing the news of that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well.
I had not a conversation. I saw Jim Stevenson was a guest on the podcast back in January, and he wrote a piece for the Charleston shooting a few years ago, and he made a comment about how his music keeps getting used for these things over and over again, and how that made him sad.
Oh, that's true. And when I wrote the same thing, I thought, well, this will be always tied to those kids at Columbine. Well, no, time has made that completely wrong. It's being tied to kids at all kinds of other schools. And I have to tell you, I was somewhere on one of my guest engagements, and the conductor came up to me and said, "I'm scheduling your American yes, this was in early February, and a conductor came up to me and says, "I'm scheduling your American Elegy in honor of in memory of some kids who have been killed in a shooting tragedy." And I said, "Which one?" He says, "The one that's going to happen."
Oh my goodness.
And sure enough, 2 weeks later, this thing happened.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so it's very sad and very sobering.
If you could plan it out, what would be the final work that you'd like to conduct or hear, and why?
That question is impossible to answer because I'm, music. I mean, they're part of who I am. And it's almost like you're asking me, which part of you do you love the most? And would you like to be with at the end of your life? Well, I want to be with all of me. And so it's very much that. It's in the music that I love is inside of me. They're like part of me. They're like my children. I love, you love both of your kids. I love my kids. There's no way I could pick one over another. I can't do that with music either that I love. And so it's impossible to answer with any degree of honesty.
Okay. I'm persistent, if nothing else, Frank. So let me ask you this question then. If someone who'd never heard of your music or of you asked you what one piece should they listen of yours, what would that be?
There is a piece of mine that's fairly recent that I love so much. It's a big piece of music, and it covers such a wide stylistic range that it's a wider spectrum of who I am, whereas maybe a shorter piece can't do that. You don't have time. So to answer your question, it's necessarily going to be a larger piece. So it would be probably my third symphony, which is also called The Shore, an orchestra, and also my first symphony, which exists both for orchestra and for wind ensemble, because Gary Green, longtime director of bands at University of Miami, made a band transcription of that work. Works have in common this kind of trajectory starting from youth through kind of wisdom to crisis to redemption and even epiphany at the end. So it's they sort of the life cycle, if you will, and so in that regard, they are very special to me, and they're broad in their stylistic range because of that.
Excellent. Well, I'll definitely link those and point people in that direction.
Yeah. Yep. Third symphony and the first symphony. Well, I just had a premiere of a new little piece for oboe and wind ensemble. It's called Serenade for Kristen that Bob Reynolds commissioned. Kristen, who's an oboe player, on the in celebration of their 25th wedding anniversary. So that just happened. But coming up, something I'm very excited about this summer is a trip to Europe, to Schladming Europe Clinic, where I'm going to be featured composer conductor there, and I'm really looking forward to that. It's such a beautiful part of the planet there in the hills of Austria, and so I'm looking forward to that. And I'm trumpet player, so any trumpeters out there who are interested in going to Europe, check it out and get online and look at Mid Europe Clinic and come join us.
Frank, how can people get in touch with you?
Probably best through my website, just frankticheli.com, and there's a link to my email address as well.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Frank, thank you so much for your time. I tried to make sure that we kept this under an hour, and I really appreciate the time that you gave me tonight. I know that you're busy.
It's been my pleasure, Mark. Thank you so much.